Is it time for the United States to move to a new system? Joining me now from Dallas is lawyer and writer Tara Ross. She is author of the book Enlightened Democracy, The Case for the Electoral College. And with us here in the studio, syndicated U.S. radio host and best-selling author Thom Hartman. His latest book is Rebooting the American Dream, 11 Ways to Rebuild Our Country. Welcome to the show to both of you. Tara, why don't I begin with you? We did this interview with Jeffrey Rosen, and he says about 70% of the American people feel like the Electoral College is kind of a dumb idea. So explain to them why they're wrong.
They are wrong. They are not maybe educated about the Electoral College, because I don't think our school does a very good job of teaching students about that. But the reason they're wrong is because we live in a big, great, diverse nation full of many different regions, different special interests, different size states. Texas and Rhode Island are nothing alike, and we need a unique presidential election process that will ensure that our candidates are representing the great diversity of interest in our nation. And our Electoral College has done a really great job of that for more than 200 years.
But Thom, you're not a huge fan.
Well, I think it's an anachronism. Al Gore got 500,000 more electoral votes than George W. Bush did, and frankly, on the recount in Florida, he ended up winning Florida too, but that was a year later. The Electoral College prevented that. I think it was a good idea 200 and some odd years ago. It was a great idea 230 plus years ago. Right now, I'd like to see, if we're going to have genuine electoral reform, let's not just do away with the Electoral College or modify it. Let's look at things like ranked voting, instant runoff voting, like they use in Australia and New Zealand, like what they use in San Francisco, where you can have multiple parties and multiple candidates, or even going to proportional representation. Now that would be, obviously for Congress, not for the presidency, but I think that there's a lot of things that we can do to improve our electoral system right now.
Well, Tara, let's touch on the Al Gore case, because it's obviously of interest to our viewers, because it's the most recent example. There have been others, of course. In other countries, former President Jimmy Carter is one of these guys who flies around the country and monitors elections. In other countries, if the person who won the most votes didn't become the president of that country, people would be howling that somebody stole the election. And yet that can sort of happen here in the United States. So isn't that a problem?
Well, if we're going to talk about other countries, in other countries we also have really divided, fractured electorates. Think France, where somebody gets into a runoff with maybe 20% of the vote, and then at the end of the day, are we going to say this person who got into the runoff with 20% of the vote, that's a legitimate winner? That's better than in America, where we at least require that presidential candidates get a majority of something. They get a majority of states' electoral votes. Now, you hear this view that the Electoral College is an anachronism because we have better communication, or the internet, or airplanes or something, I don't know. But that's not why the founders created the Electoral College. The founders created the Electoral College because they knew human nature. They knew that power corrupts. They know that human beings are fallible. They knew that pure democracies, as a matter of history, pure democracies implode. And the reason they implode is because bare or emotional majority groups will tyrannize over the rest of their neighbors, even very large minority groups. And of course, the founders were most concerned about the small states, the kind of the biggest minority constituent of their time. So they created this process because they knew human nature. Human nature has not changed in the past 200 years. The internet did not get rid of any of those reasons that the founders had for establishing the Electoral College in the first place. So like I said, I really think more education about why the founders did what they did would also result in a lot more support and enthusiasm for the Electoral College.
Do the smaller states, though, get a better deal out of this as a result, do you think, Thom?
Well, they do, because they have slightly more representation. The number of electors you have is the number of people you have in Congress. But the idea that France is a bad system, or any of the European systems. I mean, there's over 100 democracies in the world. There are only 7 that have first past the post, winner take all voting. Of those 7, 2 of them, Australia and New Zealand, have gone to ranked voting. They've to try and expand the number of parties. If you end up with 5 or 6 political parties that are seriously contending for that final spot, and one wins with, as Tara pointed out, 22% of the vote, they're going to have to put together a governing coalition that represents more than 50%. What that does is it brings in a wide variety of a diversity of voices. You have a much more diverse political debate going on in Israel or in Germany or in France than you do in the United States.
Tara, hasn't it kind of outlived its usefulness in some respects?
Well, I'll flip the question on you. If we have a system that has served us so well for more than 200 years. Why are we just going to gratuitously change it? I'm reminded of a quote by John F. Kennedy, who was a supporter of the Electoral College, and he said, look, our government is like a solar system of governmental power, and if you propose to change one of the elements, you change the whole thing. You know, if you change the gravitational pull of the sun, then you change Earth, you change its orbit, you change its atmosphere, make it perhaps unlivable. You can't change one thing without affecting everything else. It will be a domino effect. So I would argue that if we take the Electoral College out of the system, out of our governmental system, the ramifications of that will be far-reaching, and we may not know what they all are. And I think the gripes against the electoral, look, there's no perfect system. I'm not going to sit here and tell you there is, but the downsides are relatively small in my view, and the upsides are so great, and the system has served us so well. It has ensured that we have presidential candidates who must reach out to everybody in this great nation of ours. They can't camp out in one region of the country. They can't appeal to only one special interest group. George W. Bush can't go fly down to Texas and just give the oil interest everything they want. He is, you know, all of these things are not productive in our system.
Okay.
You have to
well,
reach out to everybody.
Let me let Thom jump in here because I see him smiling.
Well, I would see your John Kennedy quote and raise you Thomas Jefferson, who pointed out that, you know, if our political system can't change regularly, in fact, he said every generation should basically be reinventing America, it would be like asking a person to wear the clothes in their adulthood that they wore as a child. Times change, countries change. We can change. I agree with your point that the Electoral College does allow rural representation in a way that if in the absence of an Electoral College, you could pick 8 or 10 major cities and simply campaign in them and ignore the rest of the country. We have to figure out a way to do something about that. And then this is where I think, you know, going to ranked voting, going to proportional representation, bringing in more parties that show a diversity of interests beyond just big city interests or high population area interests would be preferable to, you know, you said why do away with it when it served us so well? How can you say it served us so well when you had, you know, Al Gore getting 500,000 more votes than George W. Bush, yet George W. Bush went to the White House?
Well, I don't, my goal, I actually think that was a good result. I think 1888 was a good result, okay? And the reason I say that is because both of those candidates, the reason there was a discrepancy between the electoral vote and the popular vote is because both candidates, Cleveland and Gore, had focused too much of their energy on one type of voter. Gore's focus was really, or his strengths were much more in urban areas and of course the coastal areas that we hear about. Cleveland had very, very strong support in the South, and he really had not done a good job of reaching out to the rest of the country at all. And I would argue, look, we don't want that kind of president. We don't want to be able to reward that. You know, you go to one region of the country or one special interest and you rack up as many votes as you can. That is unhealthy for us. It is unhealthy as Americans.
I would say we want the president who the most people voted for, if we're going to call this a democracy.
I think we want a healthy political system and a healthy political dynamic more than we want one individual in one election in one state at one point of time to feel better. The founding fathers wanted to create a system that would serve generations of voters, that would create a healthy system.
Well, they wanted to create a system that would allow somebody on horseback to get to New York City when it was the first capital over a 3-day period and then report back to their voters. I mean, the Electoral College was partly an artifact of a lack of instantaneous communication and partly an attempt to recreate something that Jefferson just thought was so wonderful, the Wittgengemeinschaft that the Whig histories talked about, that England had before the invasion of the Romans. It was a council of tribal elders, basically. And I just, you know, I don't think that works today.
Oh, I thought that was odd because Jefferson wasn't at the convention, so I'm not sure where that came from.
He lobbied heavily for it. Madison was his
protege. For the
protege.
Electoral College?
Yes, Madison.
For the
Madison
Electoral College?
Yes.
The Electoral College was created in a little sidebar off the record. Nobody quite knows how it came to be.
Well, go back and read Jefferson's diaries where he talks about the Whig histories and David Hume and his huge debates with David Hume, who by that point was dead, but his debates with Hume's histories. It's there.
I'll go read it. But I don't. Jefferson was not at the convention.
No, he was
not. And this really had a lot more to do, in my view, with the Great Compromise, how the delegates decided they were going to have the representation in Congress. Of course, one state, one vote representation in the Senate, one person, one vote in the House. A compromise between Republican, small r, and Democratic, small d, interests.
You're right.
And
that
I
was
think
a
the
major
Electoral
part
College
of it.
is really much more of an outgrowth of that, in my view.
Yeah, that was a major part of it.
We got an agreement here. So we'll leave on the agreement. Tara, thank you for joining us from Dallas. Certainly appreciate it. Thom, thanks for stopping by our studio. Very interesting dialogue about a very interesting system.